Hello? That was rubbish. Let's do it again. Hello? Hello. Great. Right. So who the hell am I? People call me a futurist. I rather hate that. It's a kind of a bullshit job title. By one story invented in the 1930s by an advertising agency that was trying to convince its clients that it knew what consumers were going to be doing in the future. So they got the word ology and they put it next to the word future and they gave that job title to some poor bastard. And that's how it was invented. So I don't like being called a futurist really because, well, for a couple of reasons. The first is it's very hard for us to predict the future, and futurology is associated with prediction. And we tend to predict from within our own set of prejudices or our own wish list. A really good example of that is, of course, Back to the Future 2. Do you remember that movie? Which was full of fax machines and baseball caps and skateboards, because it was made in 1989, which is full of fax machines, baseball caps, and skateboards. And the other reason is that predictions are always wrong. And one of my favorite, I just want to demonstrate one of my favorite prediction that shows you what people were thinking about technology and also the inherent sexism of the time. And the prediction was this: women's bodies, about trains, they were upset about trains. Women's bodies are not designed to go at 50 miles an hour. Why? Because their uteruses will fly out of their bodies when accelerated to that speed. And it just shows you how hidebound we are when we're trying to think about the future. Although I have been told this is one reason that they think that Southern Trains keeps the trains below 50 miles an hour, because they're just worried about the cleaning bill. The other reason is it's very hard to predict the second or third or fourth order effects of things. So, the internet rise, very easy to predict the rise of email, but nobody predicts social media, nobody predicts the rise of fake news and all that kind of stuff. So, and the other thing about being a futurist is there are no qualifications required. All you have to do is write a book with the word future in the title, as I did, and people start calling you it. So there you go. In fact, actually, we are all futurists. Every single one. So the thing that defines human beings is not so much our use of tools or language or the fact that we don't taste nice to predators. These things actually happen in other animals as well. There's something unique about humans is that we do think about the future. We think forward. And actually all of our hopes and fears are there. As the American inventor Charles Kettering said, my interest is in the future because I'm going to spend the rest of my life there. This is where all your hopes are, this is where all your dreams are, but it's also where all your fears are. In fact, new systems of therapy now are looking at helping people not just deal with their past and their now, but also think about their future and where they're going. So when we're asked to look at the future, we're often given two predominant lenses in the media. The first is, of course, politics, and the second is economics. But there are other lenses you need to look at if you're going to be, going to think about what kind of economy we need to build. And the other two lenses I think are probably the most important are what's happening in arts and culture, because I think that tells you what people are really thinking, and then what's happening, of course, with technology. And technology is changing very quickly, and it does all sorts of strange things that can change the economy almost overnight. A classic example now is driverless cars. Now, 5 years ago, most people would consider these impossible. Now we're sort of okay with that idea. We know they're coming, but they ask certain questions to society. For instance, did you know there are 3.5 million truck drivers in America? In fact, fully 1 in 15 of the American workforce, if you take into account the motels and the cafes and the mechanics, is somehow associated with trucking. And all those jobs will probably disappear, or at least half of them will probably disappear in the next 10 to 15 years. So is the American Trucking Association thinking about that economy? Is the American education system thinking about an economy where, the job truck driver doesn't exist? Is the Trump administration thinking about this, or indeed anything else, in a sensible and systemic way? Now, the question is, of course, computers and machines have always been coming from our jobs. I collect headlines of machines coming for our jobs for the last 200 years. One of my favorites is from 1973 in the Times, and it was something like this: a prime minister must act to stop job-killing microchips. So again, it's another example of this idea that we can't really see the future. But AI is coming, it is going to change the economy. Deloitte's and the Oxford Martin School have this rather lovely report that tells you all these jobs that are going to be automated, and much more skilled jobs now. But I'll tell you right now, the safest job in the world right now is a choreographer. So if you want to definitely have a job, be a choreographer. So this is a question the economy is being asked, and we have two ways of answering that question. One is we ignore it, and we have mass unemployment and civil unrest as we fail to create an economy of the jobs that the machines can't do. Or option two is we do create an economy of the jobs the machines can't do, and these are jobs of caring and empathy and systems thinking and creativity, all the things machines can't do because they're not conscious. Now, I've only just talked about artificial intelligence there. I haven't mentioned, 3D printing, what's happening with the energy revolution, what's happening in genetics and biotechnology, nanotechnology, blockchain. I can go on forever. So for me, technology is never the answer. Technology is the question. It's the question about what kind of world do we want to make with this new tool that we've been given. And we need to answer those questions well right now, because everything is broken, isn't it? Have you noticed? Everything is rubbish. Politics. We're still using 18th century, 19th century's ways to govern the economy in the 21st century. In the meantime, you know, in the same time period, we've gone from Babbage to smartphones in terms of technology, and yet we're still using the same sort of systems that Babbage would have seen as familiar in government. And this is one of the reasons we have this retreat in democracy. In fact, only 4.5% of us live in a fully functioning democracy, according to The Economist. And we have a total collapse in trust across all our institutions. So this is not good. The way we're governing ourselves is broken. We all know it's broken. It doesn't take more than a pint on a Friday night for most of us to agree on this. The environment is broken. Johan Rockström, one of my favourite commentators on the environment, said, you may have noticed the environment is starting to send back invoices. Okay? Now, whether that's, you know, hurricane season, that's a hell of a set of invoices, or it's flooding in Bangladesh, or it's wildfires in Australia. Regardless of the humanitarian cost, it's actually very expensive things for economies to come back from. And none of them are insured against climate risk now because the premiums are too high. And what is that bill? How much is the bill building up every year of the damage we're doing to the environment? Well, a great economist and banker, a man called Pavan Sukhdev, tried to come up with a figure, and the figure he came up with was $7.3 trillion a year. 7.3, and that's 13% of the global economic output at 2009 prices. And the bad news is we are going to have to pay that bill at some point. Because as Gaylord Nelson, the great American senator, said, the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment, not the other way around. So we're breaking the environment. The concept of wealth is broken. 0.7% of the population own 41% of the wealth in the world. It's ridiculous. It's nicely summed up by a great cartoon that you may have seen from The New Yorker by Tom Toro, where there's these three children sat outside of a burning city with an adult there, and the adult's saying, well, yes, the world did get destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. It's just ridiculous. This is why the world of work is broken. Gallup do this survey every 2 years where they go around the world and ask people how they feel about their jobs, and they consistently find that 87% of us hate the place we work because we realize that we're working for a system that's, you know, fundamentally broken. And of course, the education system is broken because it's educating most of our children into a world that looks like the 1950s. This is all nicely summed up, I think, by William Burroughs, the American author, who said, after one visit to this planet, any visitor from outer space would say, I want to see the manager. So everything's broken. So the questions we're being asked are really, really important. And do we have the economic thinking to answer those questions well? Now, what happens, of course, is that, you know, organizations come to people like me and Tim and Anne, and they say, look, we understand we've got this technological disruption coming. We understand we have these problems with the environment. We understand we have these governance problems. So don't worry. You're going to help us innovate. And this is an innovation fest. They love that word innovation. It's one of my most hated words. Not because I hate the word, but because of the way people use it. Because most organizations don't mean they want to innovate. They mean they want to do absolutely nothing. But they will get KPMG to come in and rewrite the human resources manual with the word creativity in it. They'll get a nice new logo. They'll get a nice new logo that looks a bit greener. They'll do some corporate social responsibility to act as a fig leaf from the fact they're not paying attention to these global systemic problems. And they'll probably get an innovation space on the 3rd floor with some beanbags and some primary colours and nothing too sharp. Why does this happen? Why do these companies really want to innovate? Well, the most famous 5 words ever said about organisational psychology: culture eats strategy for breakfast. Peter Drucker. And we do not have the right cultures in our organisations to think about the economy and indeed the wider world sensibly. It's nicely summed up, I think, by another quote by the great American novelist Upton Sinclair, who said, well, the reason this happens is because it's very difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. And that's most of us. We're too busy doing what we're doing yesterday and being paid for it to think about the really big systemic questions we're being asked. And if we don't answer those questions well, if we don't innovate, we're all dead. That's how stark it is. So we're at an innovation festival. So what is innovation really? Well, for me, I think it's 3 things. And the first thing is, it's the culture of asking the right questions. And most of our organizations and policymakers are not even asking the right question. I want to give you a couple of examples of people not asking the right question. Kerastase, or a hair products company, have come up with a Wi-Fi-enabled hairbrush. What question is that answering, do you think? A useful question. The iPhone X. What question is that asking? You know, I mean, the biggest innovation, as far as I work out, is you now have an animated emoji that allows you to express your inner panda. This is ridiculous. You know, Bentley have just released a car which has 341 grams of CO2 emissions per kilometre. We're still exploiting the tar sands. We're still dropping bombs on children. These are not good answers to good questions. So we need to ask ourselves the right question. And the question we should be asking is, how do we make the world more sustainable, equitable, humane, just? So the second thing innovation is being future literate. understanding those questions the future is asking us right now, which we cannot avoid. So any innovation, for instance, that doesn't consider the environment and its impact on the environment isn't an innovation. It's a cost we're going to have to pay later. Any organization that isn't future literate, isn't thinking about those big systemic questions, becomes useless at best and a weapon at worst. And the third thing innovation is, it must think in systems. Too many organizations think very narrowly about what they're doing, about shareholder value, or about their particular policy agenda, or whatever. They do not think across the broad spectrum of things that are all interlinked. We're moving in a world where we're going from economies of scale, where power was centralized, and as technology allows us to move to economies of distribution, and that requires different types of leadership, different types of economic thinking. And if we don't get that right, as my friend Juan Enriquez is one of the greatest sort of investors and thinkers in America, I think, he says this: there will be whole nations who end up on the scrap heap because they do not understand this stuff. But as Eleanor Roosevelt said, of course, the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. And this festival, we're here to talk about people who have perhaps some more beautiful dreams. So to sum it up, I like to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. The bad news is everything is broken. The good news is we can fix it with the right kind of innovation. And the ugly news is it's going to get messy as these new models of innovating, these new ways of thinking, force themselves on the old world, and the old world is not going to go quietly. Taking the future seriously is going to cost some people their jobs, and it's going to hurt some people. I'm sorry about that. But not taking it seriously is going to hurt everybody and cost everybody their jobs. As Catherine the Great said at another time in history when everything was changing, a great wind is blowing that either gives you imagination or a headache. And my job, opening this today, I hope, is to give you a bit of both. The real disruptive innovation we need is to stop looking at the contents of our wallets and start looking at the contents of our hearts. The future is a mirror, and if we don't look into that future and see a world of sustainability, equality, compassion, and justice, then there's no point in getting up in the morning. Thank you very much for listening.